In this 5-minute tutorial, I'm going to show you how to draw this fur in charcoal using the photo on the left as a loose reference. This is just going to be a quick tutorial. If you'd like to see the full, not sped up version of this tutorial, you can check that out on Skillshare. I will link the video in the video description. If you don't already have Skillshare, you can also get a free month membership by using the link in the bio. The only pencil that I'm going to use for this lesson is a General's Charcoal soft pencil. If you don't have a soft charcoal pencil, you can use a medium or a hard charcoal. The only difference that you'll see with those instead of the soft one is they won't be able to spread the pigment as easily as you can with the soft. So you may need to add a few more layers than I do with my soft pencil. I also like to use my finger to blend sometimes, but I wear gloves instead of just using my finger so that I don't get oils on the paper and also so my hands don't get dirty. The other thing I use to blend is a paintbrush. For the fine hair details in the lighter portions, I'm going to use a Mono 0 eraser. The paper that I'm going to use is Strathmore Bristol Vellum paper. Now that we've gone over all of the materials, let's get into the lesson. The first thing we need to do is add the base layers. For this specific reference, I'm going to start with the darker portions because we have these really dark black portions of the fur around the edges. So because some of this is very dark and we know that we're not going to put a ton of detail in there, I just started going through with the soft pencil. As you're working, you want to make sure that you're following the direction of the fur at all times. So even if your fur is vertical up and down, you want to make sure that some of them are going in a slightly different direction. You don't want every single one to be directly, straight up and down because that won't look realistic. But you want to make sure that the overall direction is going from top to bottom. With portions like this where I want to make sure that the pigment is really sticking to the paper, I use my finger to blend. This will kind of mush the charcoal into the paper and it will make it stick there. Once I had the edges kind of where I wanted them to be in terms of darkness, then what I did was I went through and I started to do some of those darkest portions of the highlighted area. Then I use the paintbrush to blend all of the pigment that's on the paper. So once we've blended through with our paintbrush, this is the end of what we'll call the base layers. So now that we have our base layers, we're going to start adding some details. And the way that I like to do details on lighter fur in charcoal is to use the Mono 0 eraser, almost like a pencil. After I've gone through and done some of those fur strokes with the eraser, I'm going to go through and blend again. As you can see, what that does is it softens up the highlights that we just made. To create the details of the fur, basically what we're going to continue doing is making layers with both the pencil and with the Mono 0 eraser and blending them out to soften them a bit and then repeating the process. By doing this over and over again, you're going to start to get the look of a very fluffy portion of fur. I decided that I wanted to darken again this portion at the bottom underneath, so I used the charcoal pencil again and then I blended with my finger this time instead of the paintbrush. Again, using my finger here is going to make sure that the pigment stays right where you put it and it's not going to move around as much when I blend later with the paintbrush. One of the biggest things that's going to help you achieve realism in any subject is contrast. So what I like to do is make sure that I'm getting very dark areas right next to very light areas. And that's going to create a ton of contrast and it's going to make it look more realistic. So now that we have our dark portion the way we want it, we can go back again and pull out some of those highlights. And now, as we start to add these, you'll see it looks even more realistic because we have that very dark section right next to it. As you're starting to put in these details, one thing I want you to remember is you don't have to draw it exactly the way I am or exactly the way that it looks in the reference photo, as long as you're getting the general direction of the fur and you're putting in a few pieces of fur that go in a slightly different direction so that it looks like a bunch of fur on top of itself. This will help it look realistic. So what I'm doing now is I'm taking my Mono Zero eraser and I'm going and adding some final hairs. I'm using a lot of pressure for this because I really want to pull out those highlights and make them as light as possible. And as you can see here, I'm starting to add some that are going in completely different directions from the rest of the fur. When I went through and blended this last time, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't darkening those highlights I just put in, so I did this very lightly in very specific areas. I wanted to make sure that I was still getting those bigger clumps of fur that we were trying to preserve. And so I just blended in a few areas that I wanted to darken slightly, but I did that very, very lightly. If you liked this tutorial, don't forget to leave a like and a comment. And if you're looking for more tutorials, go ahead and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss them. I'm going to be having monthly 5-minute tutorials to help you improve your drawings quickly.